I still remember the exact moment my father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're a woman. This isn't your place." He didn't shout. He didn't insult me loudly. He said it calmly, like it was a fact of nature, like gravity or the sun rising in the east. And in that same breath, he turned around and handed the opportunity I had been working toward my entire life to my younger brother. Just because he was a man, that was the day something inside me broke, and something else was born. Was I wrong for what I decided to do after that? Tell me honestly, if your own father chose your sibling over you simply because of gender, would you just accept it and move on, or would you fight back in your own way? I grew up believing that hard work was everything. That's what my father preached, at least. He ran a medium-sized manufacturing business that he had inherited from my grandfather, and then expanded through years of grinding labor, sleepless nights, and sacrifices I genuinely respected. Our house was always filled with stories about struggle, about starting with nothing, about building something with your own hands. As a little girl, I idolized him. I used to sit in his office after school, doing my homework quietly in the corner while he talked on the phone or went through paperwork. I loved the smell of paper, ink, and coffee. I loved watching how people respected him. Somewhere deep inside, even before I understood words like sexism or patriarchy, I thought, one day, that will be me. My brother, on the other hand, couldn't have cared less back then. He was younger than me by 3 years, loud, carefree, and honestly kind of spoiled. He loved sports, hanging out with friends, and avoiding responsibility whenever possible. While I was asking my dad questions about invoices and suppliers, my brother was begging for a new bike or disappearing to play outside. And yet, somehow, even as kids, the expectations were different. When I stayed late helping my mom in the kitchen, it was good training. When my brother didn't lift a finger, it was boys will be boys. I noticed it, but I didn't fully understand it yet. In school, I excelled. I don't say that to brag, but it's important. I was the top of my class in math and economics. Teachers constantly told my parents that I was disciplined, focused, and had leadership potential. My father would nod proudly when they spoke, but the praise never translated into permission or opportunity. It was always, "That's good for her future family," or "She'll make a very educated wife someday." My brother barely passed some classes, and when he did well, it was celebrated like a miracle. Still, I pushed myself, because I believed that results would eventually speak louder than tradition. When it came time for university, I chose business administration without hesitation. My brother wasn't even sure what he wanted to study yet. I remember sitting at the dinner table, explaining my plans to my father, how I wanted to specialize in operations management and eventually help modernize the company. I had ideas, real ideas, about improving efficiency, expanding digitally, and cutting unnecessary costs. My father listened in silence, his face unreadable. When I finished, he simply said, "Focus on your studies. We'll see later." At the time, I thought that meant he was considering it. I didn't realize, "We'll see later," was just a polite way of saying, no. University was where I truly found my confidence. I wasn't just good, I was excellent. I worked part-time, interned during summers, and even helped classmates with their projects. Professors encouraged me to aim high, to apply for competitive programs, to think about leadership roles. Meanwhile, my brother switched majors twice and complained constantly about how hard everything was. My father paid for both of our educations without complaint, but there was a difference in tone. With me, it was an investment in security. With him, it was an investment in the future. Things became very real during my final year. My father's health started to decline slightly. Nothing dramatic, but enough that conversations about succession began popping up more often. Relatives would visit and casually ask who would take over the business someday. Without fail, everyone looked at my brother. I'd be sitting right there, smiling politely, feeling invisible. One day, after everyone left, I finally asked my father directly. I told him I was graduating soon, that I wanted to work at the company, learn from the ground up, and eventually take on more responsibility. I reminded him of my qualifications, my internships, my grades. I was calm, respectful, hopeful. That's when he said it. "You're a woman. This business requires toughness, authority, and long hours. You'll get married, have children, your priorities will change." I remember my throat tightening, my face burning. I asked him what that had to do with my ability to work. He sighed, like I was being naive. "It's just how things are," he said. "Your brother will join after graduation. You should find a nice office job somewhere else, something comfortable." I didn't cry in front of him. I nodded, excused myself, and went to my room. But once the door closed, I completely fell apart. I cried into my pillow until my chest hurt. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. Years of effort, dreams, and loyalty dismissed with one sentence. What hurt even more was that my brother hadn't even asked for this. He hadn't expressed interest, passion, or commitment. He was chosen by default, by biology. When my brother found out, he was awkward about it. He told me, "It's not like I asked for it," which somehow made it worse. He didn't refuse it either. He accepted it, shrugged, and went back to his life. Our relationship changed after that. There was an invisible wall between us, built from resentment I didn't want to feel but couldn't stop. I loved him, but every time I looked at him, I saw what had been taken from me. After graduation, I did what my father suggested. I got a job at a reputable firm in a nearby city. On paper, everything was fine. The pay was decent, the environment professional. But inside, I was miserable. Every spreadsheet, every meeting reminded me that I was working for strangers, while my own family's legacy was being handed to someone less qualified. I kept in touch with the business indirectly, hearing updates through my mother or relatives. And the more I heard, the more frustrated I became. My brother was struggling. He missed deadlines, clashed with senior staff, and made careless mistakes. Employees who had watched me grow up quietly expressed disappointment. Some even asked why I wasn't there instead. At first, I tried to let it go. I told myself that life wasn't fair, that I could build my own path. But then my father started calling me for advice. Casual questions at first. "How would you handle this supplier issue? What do you think about this expansion idea?" I answered every time, carefully, thoughtfully. Part of me hoped that he'd finally see my value, that he'd realize he had been wrong. But the calls never turned into offers. My ideas were used, implemented even, but I remained on the outside, invisible again. One evening, after a particularly long call where he praised my insight and then immediately said, "I'll discuss this with your brother," something inside me snapped. I realized that I was being used without being respected. I was good enough to solve problems, but not good enough to be seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, from childhood to now. All the small moments I had brushed aside suddenly formed a clear picture. This wasn't just about a job. It was about control, tradition, and the belief that my worth had limits simply because I was a woman. That's when I started thinking differently. If I couldn't be part of the business, maybe I could compete with it. The idea scared me at first. It felt like betrayal. But then I asked myself, hadn't I already been betrayed? I had the knowledge, the skills, and the industry insight. I knew the suppliers, the clients, the weaknesses. I knew exactly what my father's company was doing wrong, because I had been fixing their mistakes from a distance. Slowly, the idea stopped feeling wrong and started feeling necessary. I began quietly researching market gaps, startup costs, potential partners. I worked longer hours, saved aggressively, and built a plan piece by piece. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my brother, not even close friends. This was mine. For the first time, the anger I felt was fueling something productive. I wasn't crying anymore. I was focused. Around this time, my brother's position at the company became more secure in title, but shakier in reality. Employees complained more openly. Profits dipped. My father grew stressed, though he never admitted regret. Instead, he doubled down, blaming market conditions, blaming staff, blaming everything except his own decision. Meanwhile, I was laying the foundation for something that could change everything. So that's where I was, standing at the edge of a decision that could either set me free or tear my family apart. I had the plan, I had the motivation, all that was left was the choice. Before I tell you what happened next, and how far I actually took this, I want you to pause for a second and put yourself in my place. If your own father denied you an opportunity purely because of your gender, then benefited from your intelligence without acknowledging you, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace, or would you have chosen yourself, no matter the cost? Because in the next part, I'll tell you exactly how I made my move, and how everything spiraled in ways none of us saw coming. By the time I finally made my decision, it didn't feel impulsive anymore. It felt inevitable. Like all the roads I had walked my entire life were quietly guiding me to that exact point. I remember sitting alone in my apartment late at night, lights off, city noise humming outside, staring at my laptop screen with my business plan open. My name was at the top, bold and centered. Not my father's. Not my family's, mine. And I whispered out loud, almost shaking, if not now, then never. Was I about to become the villain in my own family's story, or was I finally stepping into the life I had earned? I started my company quietly, no announcements, no social media posts, no dramatic exits. I registered it under a neutral name that didn't immediately connect back to me or my family. I used my savings, every bonus I had earned, every sacrifice I'd made while working jobs I never wanted. I rented a small office space, barely bigger than a storage unit, and furnished it with secondhand furniture. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and more importantly, it was mine, every morning. When I unlocked that door, I felt something I had never felt before: ownership over my own future. The first few months were brutal. I was doing everything myself. Sales, operations, accounting, marketing. I'd work my regular job during the day and build my business at night, surviving on coffee and stubbornness. There were moments I doubted myself, moments I wondered if my father had been right, if this world was just too unforgiving. But every time I felt like quitting, I remembered his voice telling me, "This isn't your place." And that was enough to keep me going. What I hadn't fully anticipated was how quickly word would spread. Industries are small, especially niche ones like ours. People talk. Suppliers remembered me. Clients remembered my ideas. Some were hesitant at first, unsure if backing a new company, led by a woman, was a risk. But others, especially those who had been frustrated with my father's company lately, were curious. I didn't badmouth my family business. I didn't need to. I simply offered something better: efficiency, transparency, and respect. The first big contract I landed felt surreal. I remember refreshing my email over and over, afraid it would disappear. When the confirmation finally came through, I laughed and cried at the same time. That contract paid more than my monthly salary at my old job. I resigned the next week. When my manager asked why, I smiled and said I was starting my own venture. He congratulated me without hesitation. That simple gesture meant more than he probably realized. As my company grew, so did my confidence. I hired my first employee, then my second. I slept a little more, ate a little better. For the first time, my life felt aligned. But of course, nothing stays hidden forever. The day my father found out is burned into my memory. He called me unexpectedly one afternoon. His tone was sharp, controlled. He asked me directly if the rumors were true, if I was running a company in the same industry. I didn't lie. I told him yes. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind that feels heavier than shouting. Then he said, "You're competing with your own family." I told him calmly that I was competing in the market, not against him. He didn't accept that answer. That conversation turned into an argument that stripped away years of unspoken tension. He accused me of betrayal, of disrespect, of ambition gone wrong. I reminded him that I had asked for a chance, that I had begged to be included. He dismissed that, saying I should have been patient, that I should have accepted my role. That's when I said the words I had held back for years. I told him that my role had been chosen for me the day I was born female, and that I refused to live inside someone else's limitations. After that call, things escalated quickly. Clients started choosing my company over his. Suppliers offered me better terms. Some of his longest serving employees reached out to me privately, asking if I was hiring. I struggled with that. I didn't want to tear his company apart, but I also couldn't ignore the reality. People wanted to work where they felt valued. I hired carefully, ethically, never pressuring anyone. Still, every departure from his company felt like another crack in our relationship. My brother took it the hardest, even though he pretended otherwise. We met once, reluctantly, at a family gathering. He pulled me aside and asked why I was doing this to him. His voice wasn't angry, it was scared. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just about me anymore. He had been placed in a role he wasn't prepared for, carrying expectations he never asked for. I told him the truth. I wasn't doing this to him. I was doing it for myself. I offered to help him, genuinely, to share insights, to collaborate. He refused. Pride, fear, and our father's shadow stood between us. Around the middle of that year, everything came to a head. My company landed a contract that had previously belonged to my father's business for over a decade. It wasn't stolen. It wasn't manipulated. The client chose me after a competitive review. When my father found out, he showed up at my office unannounced. Seeing him standing there, in that small space I had built from nothing, was surreal. He looked around, taking in the employees, the energy, the evidence of my success. For a moment, I thought he might finally say it, that he was proud, that he had been wrong. Instead, he told me I had crossed a line. That confrontation was the most painful moment of my life. Not because he was angry, but because he still couldn't see me. He talked about family honor, tradition, legacy. I talked about fairness, ability, and wasted potential. We spoke the same language but heard completely different meanings. When he left, he said something that stayed with me. "You've won the business, but you've lost your family." I sat down on the floor after he left and cried until my employees quietly went home. This is the part where I want you to pause and really think. This was my reality. I had achieved what I was told I couldn't. I had built something successful, something respected, but the cost was heavy. So before I tell you how it all ended, how the fallout reshaped everything, I want you to ask yourself, if success meant proving your worth, but losing the approval of the people who raised you, would you still go through with it? Comment below what you would have done in my place, because this next part is where everything finally broke and healed. The months that followed were a blur of growth and grief. My company continued to thrive. Industry publications featured us. I was invited to speak on panels, to mentor young women, to share my story. Each invitation felt like validation, but also like a quiet reminder of what could have been if my father had just believed in me sooner. At home, things were cold. My mother tried to mediate, caught between loyalty to her husband and love for her daughter. Family dinners became rare, tense, and short. Then something unexpected happened. My father's business began to seriously decline. Not because of me alone, but because the cracks had been there all along. Poor management, resistance to change, internal resentment. One evening, my brother called me, his voice shaking. He told me he couldn't do it anymore, that the pressure was crushing him, that he felt like a failure every day. For the first time, he admitted what I had known all along. He was never chosen because he was capable. He was chosen because he was male. That conversation changed everything. A few weeks later, my father suffered a mild health scare, nothing life-threatening, but enough to slow him down. Enough to force reflection. He called me to the hospital. I went, heart pounding, unsure what to expect. We sat there, the beeping machines filling the silence. He looked smaller somehow. Older, tired. And then, quietly, he said my name in a way he hadn't in years. He told me he had been wrong. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. He admitted that fear and tradition had guided his decisions more than logic. He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply acknowledged me. In the end, my brother stepped down. The business was sold to a larger firm. My father retired. My company remained independent, strong, and growing. Our family is not the same as it once was, but it's honest now. There are no illusions left, just acceptance. So was I wrong? I don't think so. I didn't destroy my family. I refused to destroy myself to keep them comfortable. Sometimes, choosing yourself looks like rebellion to people who benefit from your silence. If you were on my side, like this video. Subscribe for more real stories like this, stories about choices that hurt and heal at the same time. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I read them. I really do. I'll see you all in the next story.